What's not to love?
Hi, and welcome to this episode of John's Motorcycle Rescue and Review. And today's episode is going to be about retro versus vintage. So let's start off by defining retro. A retro motorcycle is a newer motorcycle that is designed to look old. It's designed to evoke nostalgia from an earlier time in motorcycling. As an example of a retro bike, today we've got Yamaha's 2017 SCR950. This is actually an 83 Suzuki GS1100L. Looking at these two bikes, you can see in the shape of the tank, in the way the handlebars are laid out, the old style mirrors, the round headlight, the separate turn signals, everything about the Yamaha is designed to evoke this a memory of this time period of the 80s and late 70s when motorcycles were more basic. Right now the retro bikes are super popular. And so really I thought this was an interesting comparison because really for about the same amount of money you can own either a retro bike or a true vintage machine. So what are the pros and cons of these two types of motorcycles? You know, which one, if you're looking for a bike that has that style, that has the old style, you know, which one would really suit you better? A lot of that depends on personality. It depends on what you want in a motorcycle. We're going to take a look at these two motorcycles. We'll actually ride them back to back and see how they compare. You know, it's tempting to think that all of the new bikes are going to be just a drastic improvement in every area over the old bikes. You know, sometimes that's really the case, but sometimes it's not. The first bike we're going to look at here is Yamaha's SCR950. As I said before, it is a more modern bike. It has a fuel-injected 950cc V-twin. It's got the kind of the retro spoke wheels, even the fork gaiters. Those were seen on some of the older bikes. And really, it's a nicely styled machine. The Yamaha SCR950 is a scrambler type motorcycle that is designed to look old. Some of the features that are upgraded on the Yamaha as opposed to the Suzuki: the Yamaha has modern, it's got dual piston brakes in the front, it has fuel injection, it's a belt drive motorcycle, which is nice. It's low maintenance and fairly lightweight. It has a digital instrument cluster. It's got the modern wave type rotors, although that's more for cooling than for performance. If you want a machine that you just go out every day and you're going to use it for daily transportation and you hit the starter button, it fires right up, you don't have to wait for the motorcycle to warm up at all really. The fuel injection kind of handles the choke and all of that stuff. There's going to be less owner involvement in keeping that bike running and tuned and all of that stuff, you know, over the next 5 years of ownership. So with all of the modern features and the modern reliability, why would you want to own a vintage bike? If you can get the looks of a vintage bike without some of the headache, you know, really what appeal does the vintage have? You know, for me personally, this era of motorcycle is just very nostalgic. I grew up just loving the style of the vintage machines. Kawasaki Z1, the Suzuki GS1100, you know, all of these iconic motorcycles, those are what shaped my motorcycling taste. When I look at the Suzuki, I see just a robust 4-cylinder motor across the frame, 4 carburetors. You know, this one has a 4-in-1 exhaust sound. It's got the 4-in-1 pipe. There's a sense of owner involvement in this bike, especially for me. I bought this bike as a parts bike. I paid $250 for it. It was in fairly rough shape. It had low miles, but everything on it needed to be kind of gone over, and it was a several-year project to get it set up the way I want it. So now I have it up to my standards, up to my taste. There's a little bit of personal pride in taking something and rescuing it. So for me, that's part of the appeal of this bike. Performance-wise, the shocking thing to me is that there is a whole lot less difference in performance than you might think between a 2017 and a 1983. And in fact, if you look, the Suzuki actually has some advantages. It's got the dual disc brakes up front. It does have a little bit bigger motor, so you know it's not necessarily a fair comparison there. It actually has adjustable suspension front and back, and you can do that with air preload in the front, you can do it with the preload and the damping in the back. So it has a little bit more sophisticated parts on it, even though it's a 1983. Another thing that the Suzuki has that I appreciate is its shaft drive. That is also low maintenance, and honestly, you know, I would prefer a shaft over the belt drive on the Yamaha. As far as instrumentation goes between the two bikes, really the only instrumentation that the Yamaha has is a speedometer and a low fuel warning light. In contrast, on the 83 Suzuki, I have a nice speedometer, I have a fuel gauge, I have a gear indicator, and most important really to me is a tachometer that tells me when I'm getting close to the max RPM of the engine. Comfort-wise, believe it or not, even though this is an original seat from 1983, this is one of the most comfortable seats ever produced for motorcycling, and it's just fantastic. It's not sacked out after all these years, and really it's very, very comfortable. Unfortunately, I think the Yamaha seat looks great, but comfort-wise, it's not even in the same class. The old Suzuki is more comfortable to sit on for a longer period of time. All of those things, you know, the sound to me, the feel of a four-cylinder engine, the instrumentation, and just the ability to adjust the suspension, all really keep the Suzuki shockingly modern feeling when from the saddle. This is a good opportunity to show some of the differences and the advantages of a retro bike versus a vintage machine. So we're going to do a cold startup. Right now it's about 30 degrees here in Pennsylvania, so it is a cold startup. Neither of these bikes has been started in about a week, so I'm going to go through the procedure for each one and just let you see kind of the ease of the new machine with the fuel injection and the way it automatically adjusts for the cold, and then a startup for the carbureted machine, the older carbureted machine. And I'll start, since I'm right here, I'm going to start with the older Suzuki. I'm actually going to put the fuel on prime. And what that does is it allows, over time, the gasoline evaporates from your carburetors. What that's doing is just allowing the gas to flow into the carburetors, turning it back to the on position now. It is in neutral. I'm going to give the bike full choke on the lever here. And now the choke is off. I'm going to let the bike continue to warm up for a little bit until when I flip the throttle, the bike just flips. It picks up revs cleanly. If I do it now, it's going to stumble a little bit because the engine is still cold. So I'll let it warm up and get up to temperature before we actually take it out on the road. I'll give it a little bit more choke now to help it do that. In contrast, I'm now going to start up the 2017 SCR950. Put the bike in neutral, pull the clutch. Even though I could pull away right now on the SCR950 and not have any issues with the bike stumbling or popping, I do want to let the engine continue to warm up for just a little bit and get the oil up to temperature. That's just healthier for any mechanical system to let it warm up a little bit, especially in colder weather. So let me gear up. We'll take both of these bikes for a ride and give you my riding impressions, and then we will come back and wrap this up.
All right, I am on the SCR950, and right away you can see the very simplistic instrument readout. It does have a low oil pressure warning light. It's got a high beam indicator, turn signal indicator, low fuel lamp, and a check engine light for the fuel injection and emission system. But other than that, it's really just a trip meter, a clock, and the speedometer. Even in this cold weather, the SCR950 just immediately, the fuel injection compensates for the colder weather, runs the bike a little bit richer, so there's no hunting or popping or surging of the fuel injection system. The bike just runs very smoothly. I'm going to take it easy here for the first couple of miles, let the bike warm up to temperature more. The handling is very light, very easy, minimal vibes coming through the handlebars. You can feel it's a lower frequency vibe than you would get from, say, a 4-cylinder. Yeah, immediately I'm comfortable on the SCR. It handles very lightly, very easily. It's got good low end power, nice mid-range, a very flat torque curve. It has a nice vintage vibe, very relaxing to drive. Clutch pull is very light, the transmission shifts nicely, brakes are decent. The handling on this bike, really, it's so easy, it makes it a, if somebody even were looking for their first motorcycle, this would be a great place to start. But I've been riding for a long time and it's still really fun to hustle it in the corners. And the amount of confidence that it gives, you know, it is a cold day here. I'm on cold tires and I still have the confidence to, you know, go around the corners at a brisk pace. I'm not being crazy, just having fun with it. To me, a retro bike, it really depends on what you're looking for, in that some people want something with completely modern power, brakes, handling, and they don't want to sacrifice any performance at all, but they want a machine that looks old. And, you know, Kawasaki Z900 and their the Z650. You also have like Yamaha's XSR900 and XSR700. Those bikes are of that. They're really a modern feeling bike, but they have the somewhat vintage styling on them. But to me, there's a couple of bikes that are newer bikes that really do, they capture that retro feel. Triumph has done a wonderful job with the Bonneville line and the Thruxton. And to me, honestly, this Yamaha SCR950 is just a great bike in that it really captures kind of the simplicity of motorcycling and some of the vintage machines, and it gives you that nostalgic feel in a way that the more modern retros just don't do. And for that reason, I really like the SCR. Power-wise, it definitely has torque. It's not a high horsepower motor, but you know, you'd never feel like if you get on the gas it doesn't have passing power, and if you downshift it can be very entertaining. I'll hustle it a little bit through these twisties. And you can see the transition from side to side is very easy. And this bike it does run nice. And really, if you're looking for something that, you know, has that nice classic style, I haven't taken this to a lot of like bike shows or anything to see how people respond to it in public. I don't know if they would just kind of not give it a second glance, or if they would, the public in general would gravitate towards this as a, you know, a retro looking machine and approach you and ask you about it. So, you know, if anybody out there has owned an SCR for a long period of time, you could certainly chime in here and answer that. But I know on my Suzuki, my 83 Suzuki, man, everywhere I take that, people who aren't even necessarily motorcycle people come up to me and ask me, is that a new bike? Is that a used bike? What's the deal? It generates a lot of interest, and it's really fun. I mean, you get to talk to a lot of people, and that's part of the appeal to me of having something that's a vintage machine. I really like them for that reason. But if you just want, if you want that vintage look, some of that vintage feel, a bike that's just going to be a fun, low pressure, it's not something that's going to pressure you, but it is fun if you do want to push it a little bit. Man, this Yamaha 950 is a hard bike to beat in those respects. I really enjoy it. All right, we are on the 1983 Suzuki, and this is a GS1100L, and I'm doing right now I'm adjusting the choke as it warms up. You can see. We'll take a look right now just at the instrumentation and how complete that is. Up at the top, across this line, I have a gear indicator, and it'll tell me 1 through 5 what gear I'm in. We also have a really nice fuel gauge. Got the odometer, trip meter, and the 85 mile an hour speed limit. I'm sorry, 85 mile an hour speedometer. We also have a really nice tachometer. And so we're going to just pull away right now. Again, this is colder weather than I like to ride this bike in, but this will just give you kind of an idea of the difference between modern fuel injection and this bike is well carbureted, but you just get to kind of see when you ride a carbureted bike in the cold, they hunt and pop when you start off. We are on the 1983 Suzuki GS1100L, and a couple of things stand out right off the bat. One, it's cold, so I'm going to run this bike a little bit further down the road before I get into some twisties and kind of open it up a little bit, let the bike thoroughly warm up. But the next thing is the shift throw on this bike is super short, very precise, much shorter than the Yamaha. Very nice shifting. The clutch is a little bit heavier. Clutch action. It's not terrible, but it's just heavier than the super light Yamaha. I do like the instrumentation. I can see all of my gauges clearly. This does not have quite the legroom that the Yamaha does. The Yamaha is more forward. Foot controls make it easier to kind of stretch out a little bit. For a short trip like this, the seats really aren't going to make a difference, but longer haul, the seat on this is super comfortable. There the cold is. I'm going to wait just a little bit longer to really get into it. So again, this bike actually handles really well in the twisties. This is one of my favorite little sections right near the house. Handling on this is very confidence inspiring. And you can see, this bike pulls decently even from very low RPM. I'm in top gear right now, and really below 50 miles an hour it still picks up. As the bike warms up, the carburation will clean up really nicely. I could probably go one size further up on my mid-jets, my air jets, and that would really, it would smooth it out even more on colder days. But because this bike doesn't have a fairing, I don't ride it a ton in colder weather. handling on this bike is very precise. The suspension is very tight, very crisp. As I said, the shift throw is very minimal. The clutch pull is a little bit heavier than that Yamaha, but the Yamaha is one of the lightest clutch pulls I've experienced on a bike. Bike's warming up now, pulling more cleanly, and just letting me enjoy the sound of that big 4-cylinder motor. This has a 4-in-1 Delcovic pipe, and I just love the sound of it. Love the way it crackles on downshifts. What's not to love? In warmer weather, the difference between the startup procedures on this bike is a lot less. This bike warms up quite quickly on a warmer day. It's only when we get into these days that are in the 30s and low 40s that it kind of huns and pops for a little bit. Hit some twisties here with this bike and just kind of give you a feel for it. Yeah, and this bike is honestly, this 83 Suzuki is just very, very competent still. It has a motor that's still powerful and fast by today's standards. And other than, you know, again, the cold warm-up situation, it carburetes incredibly well. And there's really, that's really on cold startup is the only advantage of fuel injection over the setup on this bike. This bike also has fantastic brakes. It's got the best stock brakes of any of my vintage bikes, and you know, if I want to stop, man, it hauls it down fast with good brake feel, good control, and honestly it actually has, I think, a bit of an advantage braking wise over the SCR. You know, taking this bike from really being something that was almost valueless and really getting it to the place where it actually has value and can appreciate in value is very satisfying. It's very satisfying to have, you know, make something that runs and runs and rides really well out of something that was a non-runner. That's just, there's a satisfaction in that I don't get on the modern bikes. But if you're not really that mechanically inclined, and you're not, you know, you don't have the wherewithal or financial resources to really get a vintage bike on the road and into shape, you know, it's probably not for you. But if you like that look, you know, then they've got so many new retro choices out there that are super nice. You know, you can still ride something that looks like this, and even, you know, in the case of the SCR, has a lot of that vintage feel. So I hope this review just gives you kind of an idea of what these bikes are like, what they're like to ride on a regular basis, what they're like to own. You know, with a vintage machine, a true vintage bike, it is more owner involvement, and with that comes a level of satisfaction. Or if you know, if that's not your thing, it can come with a high level of frustration. So, you know, personality-wise, if you just want something to get on and go and enjoy, and you don't want to ever have to mess with anything, man, just do yourself a favor, buy a retro bike, and, you know, have at it, have fun. For me, I like both. And there's days I just want to hit the button and go, and I can enjoy the modern stuff, but I really, you know, what I tend to hold on to for longer periods of time are my vintage bikes, because I have more of a connection with them. So I hope this helps. Hope you enjoy this video, and until next time, ride safe.